Hello everyone and welcome to the Omega Metroid Podcast. My name is Andy Spiteri, joined this week by Doominal Crossing. Doom, how are you? Thanks for coming on and hanging out with me today, man.
Hey, no problem. You know I always enjoy doing these things. Thanks for bringing me on again, Andy.
It's always a pleasure to have you on and chat, and we have got a lot of chatting to do today, my friend. We are back with a definitive ranking, but I feel like maybe before we get there, we should take a second and talk about our friends over at Shinesparkers, who just had the big reveal that Harmony of the Hunter Returns, the latest Harmony of the Hunter album, is coming out on August the 6th. Dude, I'm hyped for this. You make music. You must be hyped for this.
Oh, I'm super excited. I've been a huge fan of the Harmony projects ever since the first one, which I believe came out on Metroid's the 30th anniversary, I believe. Or was it before that? I can't remember. It was on the original Harmony of the Hunter was on one of Metroid's big anniversaries. It might have been the 25th or the 30th anniversary.
I think it was the 25th. I think.
Okay, all right. Don't quote me on that. Sorry if
don't quote me either.
Sorry if I messed that up, Gladrax. But, anyways, yeah, I've listened to not just the Metroid versions, but also the Harmony of a Heroes album, which covers the Smash Brothers series, and of course Harmony of a Champion, which, believe it or not, that's actually my favorite of the Harmony albums so far. And that's a Pokemon remix album. And I'm not even that much of a Pokemon fan, but I really enjoyed the music and the kind of progressive storytelling that album did. So I'm just a huge fan of this big community collaborative effort, and happy to see it revisiting Metroid again and coming up very soon in just a couple weeks on August 6th. Really looking forward to that.
I mean, that at the time of this recording, this is like 2 weeks away.
Oh yeah,
it's like maybe not even. So yeah, we're gonna be listening to this very soon. So very excited. I've said this on the show before, but like I usually just like play albums or sometimes I'll just play like video game soundtracks at work, or like I'll listen to Radio Cutman. So I'm pretty jazzed to have like a new kind of background record going on while I'm doing my thing in the office. So yeah, very much looking forward to that. August 6th. Of course, that is from our pals over at Shinesparkers. So that's going to be very cool. Darren Kerwin, one of the heads of Shinesparkers. This guy had a hand in the AM2R soundtrack, which is like legit one of my favorite Metroid soundtracks ever. So I feel like this is going to be good.
AM2R is pretty amazing and might be related to our main topic today.
You're good, man. I was just about to segue, and you beat me to that segue.
Yeah, that's the power. It's the power of the speed booster right there.
Yeah, he shine sparked right over me. Yeah, absolutely. That is a nice little transition into what we are here to talk about today. Of course, the world is still hyped up over Metroid Dread, but we're going to dial it back this week, and we're going to take a look into the past, into the long past. We're going back 30 years, and we are talking about Metroid II: Return of Samus for the Game Boy. Not the Game Boy Advance or the Game Boy Color, the OG Game Boy. We are doing a definitive ranking of this game. We have never talked about this game on the show before, so I'm excited to get in. Doom, I have a question for you.
All right, hit me.
Were you born when this game released?
No, I was born a year before Super Metroid came out in '93. So this game beat me by just a couple of years.
So I'm older than you. So I was 3 years old when this game came out, which is wild to think that this game is as old as I am, pretty much. So I went back and I replayed it. I bought it on my 3DS, and I really encourage everybody that is listening to this, if you do not own this game, go pick it up on the 3DS. It's like $5, and rumor and innuendo is that the servers are going to be shutting down for the 3DS and Wii U soon. I think that the Japanese eShop stopped accepting credit cards. So if you're thinking about getting this game and you're on the fence, do it sooner rather than later, because you never know when those servers are going to close. But yeah, I had a good time just going through and replaying this. And of course, this is not AM2R, it's not Samus Returns, but I think that in its own way, it really holds up. But of course, we're going to break it down by 10 distinct categories here, and Doom and I are going to score it on a scale of 1 to 5. We're going to talk about the world and atmosphere, the art style, the story, the pacing and progression, the gameplay and combat, the items, the areas, the enemies and bosses, the expansions, and the music and sound design. So, Doom, we have like a ton of stuff to get into here. So, should we just like jump right in here?
Yeah, let's do it. We have a quite a laundry list to go over right here, so yeah.
Well, let us start off with maybe the most important element of a Metroid game, at least for me, and that's kind of the atmosphere, the ambiance, the vibe of the Metroid game. Some of them, I would even say most of them, really excel in this area, and I think that Metroid 2 is no different. And I guess I should preface what I'm going to say for this whole episode with the way that I tried to rank this game, because I mean, obviously, almost all of this game is it's super outdated, right? I mean, this is a 30-year-old game. So I tried to go in with a mixture of I'm ranking it based on A, how it holds up today, but more so B, in context back in 1991, how this game was kind of, blazing the trail back then. So my rankings are kind of a mixture of that. So I just wanted to be clear with that going forward, because some of my scores might seem a little bit high and ridiculous if someone is playing this for the first time and just being like, what is this guy smoking? But I think that it's important to put context into, into this game and how old it is, and what was going on with video games, especially on the Game Boy 30 years ago. So that being said, I think that for atmosphere in this game, I'm going to give it a 3. I think that a lot of people have talked about how they really liked like the dark black backgrounds, and it added a sense of creepiness, and that the small screen kind of made you feel very enclosed. And I actually agree with that. It's very claustrophobic, easy to get lost. So I think that this game really kind of maximizes what it has to work with. I mean, of course, I'm not going to go ahead and give it a 5, because it would be better if there were, color. It would be better with some quality of life, just touch-ups to the world and everything like that to make it really feel immersive. But I think working with what they had, the black backgrounds it makes it really foreboding, and it feels like the SR388 feels dangerous to me in this game, and I feel like that's no small feat for a game, as old as this. So yeah, I'm going 3.
Going 3, interesting. I have a slightly different take on this. So I'm actually gonna go higher. I'm gonna give this one a 4 actually for world and atmosphere, which is interesting because Metroid 2 is the first Metroid game I ever played. I believe I told this story on my first appearance, but I only played it for like 30 minutes. I didn't quite get it. It wasn't until Metroid Prime where I like really started to understand Metroid. And eventually, like, I think I was in high school when eventually I bought a copy of the game for myself and finally replayed it myself all those years later. But the thing about Metroid 2 is I think this might be one of my favorite examples of a development team using the limitations of a hardware to shape unique conventions. And that absolutely shines, I think, in the atmosphere of this game. Whether and it's kind of weird because this tackles on like multiple of the bullet points, the atmosphere, because it also combines with the sound design and the enemies and the progression and all that. It kind of all contributes to the atmosphere of this game, particularly the enemies, and this really shines through with the hardware limitations, because as you progress further and further into the game, you encounter less and less of the standard enemies, only encountering those Metroids as they continue to evolve, and it gives the impression that they're becoming the dominant species in the hierarchy and the food chain, and for lack of a better word, it creates this impending sense of dread, wink wink,
There you go.
as you move throughout the game. And I don't think if this game was originated on more powerful hardware, we would have gotten something like that. And it definitely rings true to me. Playing Samus Returns, obviously that's not the game we're talking about, but as you progress through that game, it doesn't have, because the 3DS doesn't have those limitations. You still have enemies regularly popping up, even in the end game after you defeat the Queen Metroid. You're still fending off enemies left and right, and whether or not the diminishing enemies was intentional or not, I really think it just adds that much more, to the world building that Metroid 2 offers.
Mm-hmm. That's so 4. Okay. I can, I can dig that actually. And I remember when Samus Returns came out, there was a lot of criticism from people being like, this game is too colorful and this game is too
Yeah, and I
vibrant or
like
whatever.
Samus Returns. It's a
I
fantastic
do too.
game.
Yeah, I think that it's awesome, but and I wouldn't criticize it for that at all. But I do think like what you said, like this game really, like it turns. I was gonna say chicken, you know what, into chicken salad here, but it really does a great job of like, it's like okay, we have these limitations. How can we make them work for us instead of us working for them? And I think that the small screen, the black backgrounds, it does create kind of a sense of just it feels like you're suffocating, especially as you go deeper and deeper into the world. And you know the platforms and the vertical hallways in this game are incredibly small and they're incredibly long, and like it's just a very like suffocating game. And I feel like for at least when I was playing, you always feel like God, what's next around the corner, and like you're always on guard. And I feel like that's kind of what this game needed. So yeah, I think that this really did a good job with with what it had to work with. I don't know that I would rank it above AM2R or Samus Returns for atmosphere, but I mean that's not really even fair. But yeah, I mean chicken, chicken into chicken salad.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I would rank it above those two games. It's just that the atmosphere in this game just feels so unique compared to other games. There isn't really any other Metroid game that has really done environmental storytelling like Metroid 2, and so that's always stood out to me ever since I completed it about a decade ago now.
All right, well, so we're off to a good start here so far. We got a 3 and we got a 4. Let's go over to the art style here. I'm gonna give this one a 3 as well. I think that the sprite work looks really great actually for the Metroids, for Samus's ship, for Samus herself. A lot of that looks really, really good. I think that the overall world is kind of it's okay. Like it's okay, but again, this is on the Game Boy, which is a relic at this point. So it's using it's doing what it can. But yeah, I think that the sprite work here is really strong. The sprites, even like when you see the plasma beam and the ice beam and stuff like that, like those sprites just look the same as they do in Super Metroid, which I think is cool. So I think that this is a solid 3 for me. I think that they did a really good job with what they had, and I don't know. I could almost be convinced to go higher now that I'm speaking, because I do think that all the sprites are like really impressive and like all the enemies look really cool. So I don't know. Go ahead, dude. Maybe I could be swayed here.
I'm not going to be swaying you. I completely agree. 3 is going to be my ranking as well for art style. Like you said, for the time, the sprite work is really cool. The fact that they were able to cram all of this on a Game Boy cartridge, like those things cannot hold a lot of memory. I mean, look at the original Super Mario Land. Super Mario Land 2, significant improvement, but that first Super Mario Land, like you can really see the limitations of that Game Boy cartridge showing. And this game, I believe, it either came out the same year or just a year after. I'm pretty sure it was a year after, if I remember correctly. But yeah, the fact that they were able to do all that in a Game Boy cartridge, incredible. Obviously, a lot of it doesn't hold up just because of that limited color palette and just, the natural limitations of the hardware. I will say the hand-drawn art for this game is absolutely gorgeous. I love looking at the promotional art for the Metroids and Samus, and with her now iconic design with those
Yeah.
and that's actually, you know what, going back to the sprite work, that's another thing we can actually thank the limitations of the Game Boy for. That lack of color is why Samus got those pauldrons on that Varia suit, which is like synonymous with her look now. If it weren't for those Game Boy limitations, like Samus would probably look significantly different today. And so it's pretty incredible that something like that is responsible for making an iconic feature of an iconic Nintendo character.
Yeah, you totally nailed that. I was talking about the sprite work for Samus and her ship and stuff, but also like, God, these Chozo statues just look absolutely incredible. The Metroid eggs look incredible, and I should have taken this into account, but I didn't. In that, just amazing promotional artwork. This is like such a cool cover to this game, and of course, it's been redone in Samus Returns. But this is really great artwork. I'm a fan of this. I think that again, like it. I think that this is one of the things that you can look to and say like, okay, this still holds up. Like this looks pretty good still in 2021, 30 years later. So yeah, I think that this is again, doing really good for what they had to work with at the time. It's funny that they never ported this over to Game Boy Color, kind of like what they did with Link's Awakening. You would
Well,
have thought that they would have done this.
I believe there was originally a Metroid 2 DX that was originally planned in the same vein as the Link's Awakening version, but for some reason it was scrapped. I know at the very least there is a color palette available that you can do. It's obviously not as in depth as like Link's Awakening, but like I believe like the lava appears blue and Samus's suit will go from like I believe the power suit is yellow and the Various suit is red. I actually really like the red and yellow Various suit design. It's pretty cool. There was a keychain that was a GameStop pre-order bonus for Samus Returns, and it's that original Various suit design, but in color, and it looks so cool. I wish it was a Smash Palette swap, but
Oh, that'd be awesome. I'm gonna age myself here. So I had a Super Game Boy for my Super Nintendo. So like,
I have a Super Game Boy as well.
oh yeah, it's like when you put in the Super Game Boy, sometimes it would like add colors that weren't there in like the cartridge. So like, maybe I should fire this bad boy up. I don't know if I actually still have my connection cables for my Super Nintendo, but I definitely still have the cartridge for Metroid 2, and I definitely still have my Super Game Boy. So maybe I should fire this up. I remember you could do like the cool borders and stuff around the games and stuff too.
Yeah, I'm actually looking at my drawer right now where my Super NES is collecting dust, and I definitely have a copy of Metroid 2 and Super Game Boy. So I don't know, maybe I'll fire it up after this episode is done.
There you go. Well, let's keep it rolling here because we still got a lot to go over, and let's talk about the story of this game. Doom, I've went first the last couple times, so I'll let you kind of take the lead here. What do you think about the story?
All right, not too much to say here. I'm gonna give this one another 3. The story is mostly background with some small significant elements that become major factors as the series progresses later on. But in the context of Metroid 2, it's overall a pretty base experience. I think you've talked about story versus lore before, and I think overall Metroid 2, the lore that's introduced is ultimately really interesting, but again, most of it doesn't really come into play until later entries. Metroid 2 in a bubble, I don't know, for me at least, it's not a bad story, I mean, but, it's just kind of a background element. It's just an excuse to get Samus on the planet and have her blast some stuff, really.
Okay, I'm gonna go the other way. Actually, I'm gonna give this one a 4.
Okay.
And I'm giving it a 4 because for me, I think that there's like a surprising amount of story in this game, and you got to understand like the first couple Game Boy games. We're talking like Super Mario Land, and we're talking like Kirby and stuff like that, or Tetris. So like those games, Super Mario Land is like Daisy gets captured, go. Whereas this one, I can see what you're saying. Like it's the basic premise of like go eliminate all the Metroids and go. But like I feel like the way that the game ends with Samus getting the baby Metroid, and then that has obviously huge implications for the rest of the series that is still being felt to this day, 30 years later. I think that that's really cool. I think that, and this kind of touches on the areas and stuff as well. But like I think the areas in this game tell a little bit of a cool story. Probably not as much of a story as they're able to tell with the remakes, but I like seeing like all the Chozo stuff in that area. Before I had played Samus Returns, before I had played AM2R, I was like, oh, okay, well this must be where like the Chozo lived, because there are these Chozo statues everywhere. So that always stuck with me. And yeah, I think that just for like the impact that this game's story has had on the series ever since this came out, I would give it a 4, because it's not often that you would see like a really important piece of the story taking place on a Game Boy game. Like to me, in my mind, a lot of these games that came out on the Game Boy in the early years were kind of like these self-contained like little side stories, like a Link's Awakening or like a Mario Land or something like that. So pretty significant what happens in this game. So I'm going to be generous. I'm going to give it a 4.
Maybe it's just because I'm interpreting story differently. Like when I hear story, I think of like a cohesive narrative that's told from start to finish that has very specific plot elements that lead to a climax and then a resolution. That's generally what I think of when I hear story, like some sort of narrative. Whereas in Metroid 2, like again, going back to the atmosphere, I really enjoy the atmosphere of that game. It's creepy. It leaves a lot to the imagination. It makes the player ask questions. It gets you invested. But I don't necessarily consider that the story, if that makes sense. And with the exception of the basic premise, which I agree, the very end of that game where Samus encounters the baby Metroid, which really starts to influence later events. That moment in a bubble is really cool, but that's also like a small part of the story at hold, if that makes sense.
I think that's fair, because really, like, the story that I'm giving a high mark to takes place in the first 5 minutes and the last 5 minutes of this game, and maybe some context in the manual, in between. So that it's kind of one of those things where like you kind of make it your own and what you will of it. But I think that what you're saying is fair. Like, as far as like narrative pacing, there's not really a whole lot, but as far as like a cool premise and execution, I feel like it does a really good job with that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's talk about, speaking of pacing, let's talk about pacing and progression. This is kind of like a weird category, but it's a category I describe as like, am I always having fun, and am I stuck ever, and am I ever not having a good time because I can't figure out what to do, or like I have to go back and do something tedious that I don't want to do again. So this is kind of like a me thing, but this is important to me in video games, and I'm going to give this a 3, I think. And I have a criticism coming up, but I wasn't sure whether to lump it in here or in gameplay. So I decided to lump it in gameplay, but I feel like at least with this game, you're stuck, but like it's a small map. So like if you are stuck and you don't know where a Metroid is, you at least don't have like too far to go to backtrack. That being said, I feel like there are some times where like you hit a wall and you're just like, all right, well, I don't know where to go. I feel like I've went everywhere. Lots of times, a lot of the power-ups in this game are like in really odd locations, and it can take a minute to get there. So this is a little bit of a mixed bag for me. If we had 0.5s here, I'd probably give it a 2.5. But generally speaking, I think that this game is kind of small enough and short enough that you should never really be like stuck for too long or that frustrated or anything like that. And the areas that you're exploring are fun. So yeah, I give pacing and progression a 3. What say you, Doom?
Well, Lil Jon told me to get low, so I'm getting low. Well, I'm giving this a 2 for pacing and progression. That being said, though, again, like you stress, this is an old game. There's a lot of conventions at the time that we hadn't evolved to yet, hardware limitations and stuff. So I can understand that. Metroid 2 is much more linear than Metroid 1, and it's understandable because it's on a handheld experience. You have to imagine, batteries can only last so long in a Game Boy, and so you have to find some sort of structure to accommodate that. And so I can understand those setbacks. That being said, the whole game is in black and white, and all the areas look the same. It gets really repetitive and tedious after a while. Granted, today you can play this game with a walkthrough. You can download a map online. I opted to brute force my way like it was 92 when I played this, and it's the first couple areas I actually don't think is that bad. I think the level design still finds ways to cleverly navigate you the way through, and that's why I'm ultimately giving this a 2 and not a 1. But like as you go deeper into the game, a lot of the hints just get more vague. There's a lot of the classic whatchamacallit, the invisible breakable walls that that don't show any signs of like weaknesses, and so you're basically just like bombing all the floors and wall. And now you have the spider ball on top of that, so you have to slowly crawl we're getting into this is more gameplay, not so much progression, so I'll save that for that. But yeah, the progression structure, there's that. It's also a little more linear than Metroid 1. And you know me, I prefer backtracking to multiple areas in Metroid. And while I understand why they didn't do that for Metroid 2, playing it in a bubble, I also have to mark it down for that as well in the long term. So those are just my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I wonder if I'm even being too generous with a 3, to be honest, because like I feel like everything you said I agree with. So maybe, you know what, I'm gonna change mine to a 2. You convinced me to go down. The problem is that like I think that particularly once you hit Area 3, it just really comes to a halt, and like you gotta go through all the invisible walls, and you have the kind of like the not the sandy stuff, but it's almost like vines, and like a lot of that you can just like roll through, and there's no indication that you can bomb through it, but like you have to roll through to get to a couple of Metroids, so it doesn't really do a grand job of saying like maybe maybe try up here, or is there something in this room. I think that Area 3 is particularly bad for that.
It just becomes a lot more.
Yeah.
It becomes a lot more cryptic, and at the same time, the enemies immediately like it's such a. It's such like a gap in the learning curve. There's like you're on one level, and then all of a sudden the game just leaps to like a whole other level. And if you're not prepared for that, like it'll catch you off guard super fast.
Yeah, and I agree with what you said too. Like I feel like Area 1 and 2 are very like you're. I never felt lost. I never felt frustrated. Like I was going to everything. I had all the Metroids, and I was well on my way. And I was like, okay, and like I don't mind for this game it being a less traditional Metroid experience of like this giant world that you're crisscrossing through. I think that for the limitations of this, the Game Boy, this worked fine. But yeah, I do think that once you hit Area 3 and to a lesser extent Area 4, but yeah, Area 3 to me is where it was just like kind of, it came screeching. And I think this, you kind of mentioned it before. I'm just going to transition into it right now. This kind of goes hand in hand with the gameplay and combat of this game. I think, for what it is, the combat actually I think is fine. You basically shoot missiles and you shoot beams, and that's all you really need to do. And later you get the screw attack, and that's great.
I mean, it's a significant improvement over Metroid 1. I'll give it that at least.
Yeah, definitely. Gameplay is, where things get a little bit off the rails. So I'm going to give this a 2. I think even for back in 1991, I think that you probably could have included a map in this game. It's incredibly hard to navigate in this game without a map. And this gameplay and pacing and progression are so closely tied together. But yeah, I think that no map really hurts. And I think that there's a few instances where using the spider ball is somewhat cumbersome, especially because like you have to press down and then you have to press down again in order to stick. And like multiple times when I'm just trying to get into morph ball mode, I end up accidentally using the spider ball and like crawling instead. I'm like, why am I going so slow? And then I realize that I'm in spider ball. So that's kind of a little bit frustrating. And I feel like the space jump is very finicky in this game. I don't know about you.
Oh yeah, 100% agree.
This is probably the worst space jump in the series, I think.
I mean, it's the first time it appeared, so like it makes sense that it would be the worst.
Yeah, it is. I think I'm gonna give it a 2. I think no map hurts, and no. The items needed some finesse, and they needed to be refined, which of course they were in later installments. So like, I'm trying not to be too harsh here, but and another thing that just bothers me about this game too, which I feel like it's not really fair to beat this up, but also like you can get the ice beam, you can get the spazer beam, you can get the wave beam, whatever, but you can't stack any of them, nor can you switch in between them freely. You have to go and basically refine the Chozo statue in order to switch your beams, which is another just kind of like, this is kind of aggravating. Like, I get it, it's a Game Boy game, but I don't know, maybe I feel like there could have been a pause menu. I'm trying to think, and my memory is escaping me, but like, I don't know if Game Boy games really had pause menus back then, so maybe it's not fair to beat up this game for no map and no ability to switch between some of your beams, but I do think that the spider ball implementation, the space jump, are definitely things worthy of criticizing. So, yeah, I feel bad doing it, but I'm going to give it a 2.
Hey, you had to do it to him. I'm going to give it a 3, though. I'm going to go a little bit easier on the gameplay, although I do have to rag on that spider ball for a bit, because oh my god, you get the spider ball and you're thinking like, oh my god, this is the coolest item ever. I can crawl on the walls like Spider-Man, and then like 5 minutes later you realize just how wrong you were, just how tedious and boring it is. Like, how do you take such a cool concept and just make it that boring? Now later, I think especially in the Metroid Prime games, the spider ball is super awesome. It's one of the coolest. Yeah. It's one of the coolest items. It looks good in action. I think even in Samus Returns, I think the spider ball just functions better. It also moves a little bit faster. But yeah, Spider Ball. I think there's a good reason that we didn't see much of the Spider Ball after this game, because the devs realized like yeah, this wasn't as cool as we envisioned it. But yeah, I do appreciate the game for like, creating a lot of, cool staples in the series. We talked a little bit about the space jump, and while yeah, it's finicky and really the timing is super inconsistent on it, like the fact that they even came up with an idea of an infinite jump, I still think is pretty cool just as a concept in general. And the fact that they were even able to get a rough approximation of that on the Game Boy, like I still think that's a pretty cool technological achievement at that time. So I have an appreciation for stuff like that. You also mentioned the beams, and that's a super pain in the butt too, especially because in Metroid 1 it was a pain there too, but you only had the wave and ice beams, and so
Yeah.
as annoying as it was, you only had to swap to one of them, and you didn't have to like worry about like, oh, what are the tactical advantages of like, the wave versus the ice beam, because once you get to the final area you specifically need one of the beams, so you don't need to worry about like which one is like the best one. But in this game, you have like 4 or 5 different beams to swap from. Yeah, because you have plasma, spacer, ice, and wave. So yeah, you have 4 different beams. Yeah. You're doubling the amount, and so it just it causes an unnecessary amount of stress and anxiety. So I'm glad Super just said, you know what, screw it, we're just gonna combine it all together. Don't even worry about it, just enjoy it. And that just makes it a. Or yeah, go on.
They don't really make a big deal of the ice beam either with the Metroids. Like, it doesn't do any damage to them, which obviously they fixed in or they retconned rather in Samus Returns.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was thinking that the ice beam would be more useful than it was. I pretty much just went with the plasma beam the entire game once I got it.
Mm-hmm, yeah, that's pretty much you pretty much only use wave and plasma. That's generally what I go with. Spacer for the limited time you get it, but if I remember correctly, you unlock wave pretty soon after it. But yeah, and then
you unlock all of them kind of in and around the same time. I think they're all in area 2 or maybe early area 3 for some of them. But yeah, they're pretty close together.
For some reason, I thought plasma was near the end of the game. Maybe I'm just confusing it with super, because I know that's one of the last items you get there.
So they all are at the end of the game. Like, I think that there's a Chozo statue in area 4 for every one of them. So
yeah, I remember that.
Switch.
It's like the area before like the Queen fight.
Yeah, but yeah, I think Plasma was pretty. I think it was pretty early. Maybe it's in Area 3, and I'm just kind of confusing myself. But I feel like I got them kind of.
I mean, all the areas look the same, so I wouldn't be surprised if I'm confused.
Yeah, we'll get there, and we'll get there. But yeah, I feel kind of bad because like I do think that we should be. I don't know, considerate of when this game came out, and I think that Samus moves fine and she jumps fine, but some of the items that they implemented just they don't really hit for me. Space jump, spider ball, and at least the missiles work fine. It's a pretty seamless transition to missiles, so I'll give it that.
Yeah, I think ultimately the reason why I'm giving this a 3 is just because while the gameplay still has a lot of problems, and not all the ideas really come to fruition, like it still is ultimately, in my opinion at least, like a significant improvement over Metroid 1. I mean, just adding the ability to shoot while falling down, like that alone, like just solves so many problems that the first Metroid had. And so it's something so simple, and it just takes like this huge unnecessary I don't even know the word I'm looking for. Like it simplifies the game so much for the better.
Yeah, I think that shooting feels better than it does in Metroid for sure.
Absolutely.
So that at least there's that. Okay, let's move on to items and abilities here. I'm gonna let you go first because I'm like still kind of torn on what my score should be here because I have 2 different trains of thought. So I'm interested to hear what you have to say, Doom.
I mean, we kind of already talked about this, but like I said, I'm more going off this on the new abilities introduced, because the old items for the most part function pretty much exactly the same as they did in Metroid 1. But the new items, I think this game introduced, some of the coolest items that would eventually become staples, like the space jump, plasma beam. The screw attack functions exactly the same, but it looks way cooler than it did in the first Metroid game. And it gave it kind of that iconic, almost lightning, electricity kind of look to it, whereas in the first Metroid, it kind of just glowed different colors. So so even like little aesthetic choices that they decided to go towards carried over into future entries, and so I really like that as well. But yeah, I'm gonna give this a 3 as well. I actually have 4 listed on here, but like actually talking about this out loud, I have to change that to a 3, I think.
Right. Okay, so I think you convinced me to keep my score what it was. I had it as a 3 as well. And I do think that while this game doesn't have, I feel like it doesn't have like a ton of power-ups, but I mean, I guess like looking at it contextually, you look at the Metroid, like the NES Metroid power-ups, you really only have missiles, you have the screw attack, you have a couple different beams, and that's pretty
The
much
various
it.
suit.
And obviously, the various suit, yeah. So this game has everything that Metroid does, but it adds 2 more beams, it adds the space jump, it adds the spring ball, which is like the most underrated.
Oh, I forgot about
Metroid
the
item
spring ball.
ever.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that oh my gosh, that makes morph ball puzzles and bombing puzzles like so much quicker.
It makes using the spider ball like significantly easier too, because then you can jump and then stick in midair. So that's a good use. That is such an underrated item in Metroid though. Like every game, like that is just like one of my favorite ability. Not having to wait to lay a bomb, it really helps speed up the game.
Especially in this game with how long bombs take to detonate, like compared to like modern entries where they detonate almost instantly. Like
Yeah.
it's such a godsend.
Yeah, so shout out to the spring ball. You don't get enough love, but we're gonna give you some love on this show today. Yeah, I mean, some of the items I think are clumsy, like the space jump and the spider ball. So like, it's I didn't want to go any higher than a 3, but I think that it did a pretty good job of introducing, like you said, some series staples. I mean, it introduced the plasma beam. It introduced I think it was the wave beam. Maybe not. Maybe it was another beam.
The spazer.
Something that Metroid
The
did.
spazer.
The spazer.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And it got rid of the long shot, or the long beam, or whatever from Metroid, which is a stupid power up. So that's kind of cool. But yeah, I think a 3 is appropriate.
Yeah.
Not like anything out of this world, but it did. It had some good concepts and ideas more than the actual execution. But again, trying to just like give it a little bit of leeway, because it's 30 years old. So
Well, even the space jump, like for all the all the times I'm ragging on it, like the fact that they were even able to do something like that on the Game Boy, I still think is like pretty incredible. Just the look and feel of it and everything, that they were even able to realize a fraction of that potential on that cartridge, I think is pretty awesome.
yeah, I can appreciate that, and I think I can agree with that as well. All right, let's talk about areas. So areas are such an important part of Metroid for me, and I think even the NES Metroid game did a pretty good job of like making Brinstar feel different from Norfair, which feels different from Torian. Of course, a big part of that is the ability to have color. So this game is inherently at a big disadvantage, and my score, I think, reflects that. So I'm going to give this a 2. But I will say that I think that it did a pretty good job with what it had, but this is where the limitations of the Game Boy, I think, just like really, really show themselves. Like, every background is just black, so it all looks the same. There's a lot of the same looking platforms. There's a lot of the same looking foliage, throughout the entire game. I will say that if you go to what we know as the Chozo Temple or the Golden Temple and the Hydro Station, you can see those areas. If you've played AM2R in particular, like you can see like, okay, this is the Hydro Station and this is the Golden Temple, and you can see the idea for that there, but it's definitely not fully fleshed out. It wasn't able to be fully fleshed out because, this is where, like I said, the hardware limitations just really hold it back. All the areas start to blend together. If it wasn't for the music, which we'll talk about later, this would just feel like the exact same rooms over and over and over and over again. So I think that I think that a 2 is as high as I can go. I think Area 3 and 4 in particular are a little bit drab, particularly Area 3 actually, because that just feels like just a retread of everything that you've already been through before. So I wish that I could give it a higher score, but I can't. I think a 2 is what it has to be.
Well, I'm going to be a little bit meaner than you. I'm going to give this the lowest possible grade. I'm giving this a 1. All the areas look exactly the same, or at least almost
Yeah.
do. It's like, this actually like kind of goes into what we were talking about earlier regarding the pacing. How we both seem to agree that areas 1 and 2 have the best pacing. Like the areas, they don't hold your hand, but at the same time it still feels like the level design is intuitively letting the player know on how to traverse everything. But then once you get to area 3, it feels like all that just goes out the window. And I feel like you can
Yeah.
especially see that with the actual area design as well, because like you mentioned, the golden tempo and the hydro station. It's not entirely sure if that's exactly what the devs were going for, but you can see unique elements that could, that you could totally see, like, oh, I could see how this could,
Yeah.
it had
Like at least there's
they
water
they
in
have
Area
they
2.
have distinct features. You have these Chozo artifacts in the first area, and in the second area you have all these pipes, and especially that one long vertical pipe that you can spider ball down in the puzzle. That is also an AM2R, which is a really cool nod. But
Mhm.
but yeah, after that, like, I can't really think of like any distinctive features in any of the other areas except for the sand pits, and then maybe the sand pits and then like spikes. But like that isn't enough to like make an area feel distinct. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like, it's funny that you say the sand pits because I guess that is kind of a big defining trait of Area 3. And like I literally just played this game last night and I forgot about the sand pits because like it just looks like everything else. And I'm like, all right, weren't those in Area 2 when you got the wave beam or like? And I think they were. So yeah, I think that Area 3 is really kind of when it starts to come off the rails. And I wonder if that's like an intentional thing. Like I don't know. This is a
I
crazy,
don't like
maybe
sand.
a crazy idea, but like I wonder if like back in the day, Nintendo was like, all right, people aren't going to finish this game. Make the first couple levels look great, and like the kids will get stuck and restart or whatever. I don't know, but I feel like Area 1 and 2 are definitely more fleshed out than Area 3 and 4, unfortunately. So yeah, I think that when you get to the Queen Metroid, that little area is kind of cool and like it looks neat, but it's just yeah, these all blend together. There's I think that the black in the background is kind of a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because it makes it feel intense and ominous, but like it's a curse because it just blends everything together. Um, which is too bad because all these different areas in Metroid are such a hallmark of the series and what the series would become. But we've said it a million times on the show. You gotta work with what you have, and the Game Boy unfortunately didn't have a lot to work with. So really, like, I mean, you can see in later games, Samus Returns AM2R that an expansion of the idea, and I think that that's like much more. I'm glad that they were able to go back and do that because I feel like the thought was probably there, but just the technology wasn't.
Yeah, even in Samus Returns, while it doesn't have that same vertical pipe that AM2R has, that area is also like heavily water themed, with the underground dams in the background. And so I definitely think that was like a theme that the devs were going for in the original, at least for Area 2.
Yeah, well, it's a low one for us, unfortunately. But what can you do? Let's move on to enemies and bosses. I am interested to hear what you think because I feel like again I'm kind of on the fence about this.
So, I think the designs are really cool. I think there's a lot of variety in the designs. We were talking about this earlier in the art direction and how we really enjoyed the pixel art because there's a lot of very few of the enemies are reused. The only enemy that's really reused is that original Metroid, that first Metroid form that you encounter near the end of the game. Everything else is a completely new design. Even Samus herself as a brand is was completely rebuilt from the ground up in terms of like how she was going to be presented in sprite form. And so and so that's really cool. But in terms of what's the I guess tactical variance is what I'm trying to say. The tactical variance in the enemies, there isn't really that much difference, with the exception of the Metroids. But the problem there, and this kind of goes back into the gameplay design of that game and the ultimate flaws of the hardware. But because you're fighting the Metroids so much, like even that manages to get repetitive, despite the fact that the Metroids act and behave so much differently than the typical enemies do. And so, long story short, I'm gonna have to give this a 2 as well, just because. And again, understand the hardware limitations. We've been saying that nonstop throughout this episode, but I mean, the reality is the reality. Like, it gets very. The Metroid 2, as much as I love it, it is a very repetitive game, and repetition can be good, in some cases, but if it's overdone, if it gets overdone to the point where it doesn't become a surprise, it just becomes something you're expected, I think it loses a lot of that luster. And I think that is a great summary of Metroid 2 in general, for myself at least.
Yeah, I think that is fair. I give it a 2 as well. It's like you said. I think that there are a lot of cool enemies in this game. Maybe not a lot, but like the enemies that are in the game, I think are pretty cool. They feel like classic Metroid enemies. But as far as like bosses go, like you think of Metroid Prime and you think of some great bosses in that game, or you think of Super Metroid or Metroid Fusion. Those games have like really awesome bosses, and you look at this game and you're looking at all the Metroids, and you do have the legend Arachnus show up.
My boy.
I will say that this guy shows up and he's awesome, and it's actually a really cool fight with like you have to morph ball, you have to get in the morph ball and you have to bomb him. That's a cool fight, but it's like super super optional. You can go throughout this game without getting the spring ball, which is what you get when you defeat Arachnus. You don't need that for this game, so you don't need to fight Arachnus in this game. So I would imagine that the typical player playing this game goes without fighting that boss battle. So like literally you're just fighting an Alpha Metroid 17 times, a Gamma Metroid 14 times, 4 Zeta Metroids, and 4 Omega Metroids, and then you get to the Queen.
Ooh, so, he memorized the talking points.
No, I wish I did. I quickly looked it up so that I could sound smarter than I am. But yeah, I mean, like you said, like that's a lot of Metroids that you're fighting over and over and over again. And I think that in Samus Returns, they at least introduced like some melee moves to make these fights a little bit more interactive and a little bit more intuitive. And in both AM2R and in Samus Returns, they also realized like, man, we got a lot of Metroid fights in this game. So like we had boss fights like like the Diggernaut or like Ceres or like the Flying Chorizo or whatever, like something to kind of break that up. Whereas this is, I mean, it's Metroid, and Metroid. And most of those Metroid fights are pretty much the same. I think the Omega Metroid is a little bit different. He flies around and can cause a little bit of damage, but like the Alpha, the Gamma, and the Zeta Metroid fights are like pretty close to being the same fight. The Queen Metroid is a good boss battle, I feel like, but again, not.
It's one out of like 40 bosses in the game. It's a bit late for that.
Well, and even that one is like, I feel like it's just okay because like all you're doing is just standing beside the wall and just pumping it with missiles. Whereas like in AM2R, you're kind of moving back and you have to shoot all these different things, and you do the same thing in Samus Returns, and there's obviously power bombs and stuff. And it's not fair to compare those, obviously, but it is what it is. It's one good Metroid fight out of 40, and really, other than Arachnus, there's not much else. So like if you don't, if you're sick of fighting Metroids after the 5th one, it's like guess what, buddy? Like
that's the game.
You got a lot more to go. Yeah. So this is a 2 for me. I think that, again, we've said it so many times, but like this is a limitation of the hardware. I don't think you would ever see a game like Samus Returns now where like you have to do the same fight over and over and over and over again. So
Even Samus
yeah.
Returns, even Samus Returns tries to dwindle that a little bit with the Alpha Metroids, because there's two types of Alpha Metroids actually that you fight in the game. There's the standard ones, and then there's like this fire variant that, you know,
Oh
it
yeah.
still functions largely the same, but it has, you know, slightly different attack patterns, does a little bit more damage. It has a different appearance, and so it at least tries to make it even tries to take that and make that a little bit more dynamic. And then AM2R, in AM2R's case, they just try to they don't really change up the actual variants that much, but they put them in different scenarios and put them in unique rooms that change up the fight. Like
So, some of them you're in water, like just different, yeah, different scenarios.
lot of close quarters Gamma Metroid fights. I I gotta replay AM2R again. That's such a good game.
Such a good game. I have it on my phone actually.
Nice, nice. Yeah, yeah. And there's the
You know,
new patch that's coming out that should be dropping soon as well.
I feel like AM2R added like a ton of other bosses too. Like it had that really awesome ancient guardian fight, the Ceres, like I mentioned. It had
Flying
I mean,
Teresa.
Arachnus is back in that, which is cool. The Flying Chorizo is one of my favorite boss battles in the series. Actually, that's like such an awesome fight, and it had that. What was that thing called? Like the giant, the thing that you fight
The
in the tower
tester,
that
the
spins
tester.
around.
The,
Yeah,
the bullet hell boss. I love that thing.
yeah. So like AM2R has like a lot of stuff going on to kind of break that up, whereas you know this game is just Metroid, 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 Metroid. So yeah, it's obviously not fair to compare, but that's just the reality of the situation. So yeah, these are some twos, unfortunately, and I've got another damper score to drop on our next category, my friend. Um, so one of my favorite things to do in Metroid is sweep the board, get 100% items, 100% energy tanks, missiles, all of that stuff. I'm giving this game a 1 in the category of expansions and collectibles and extras. There is like, I don't know, 10 or so like things to pick up in this game. Maybe there's more missiles than that, but like I feel like they're not very fun to get. They're a lot of the expansions in this game require you to like just get in spider ball form and like roll along a wall and bomb random things until eventually you find a tunnel that you can roll through. I barely got any energy tanks in my playthrough. This is again very much hampered by lack of map, but I feel like there's not really a lot to collect that's optional or extra. There's not really much incentive to do so, and there's not a lot, and that's unfortunate because I feel like again in both remakes of this game there is a lot of really cool expansions and a lot of really cool collectibles that you can go out of your way to get. Not fair to compare, but I think I don't know. There's not a lot to do other than just progress. This probably again is probably a limitation of the hardware that it's on, but for me that's one of my favorite things to do in a Metroid game, and this one is like way lacking.
Took the words right out of my mouth. This is one of the few Metroid games that I never even. I'll probably never 100% Metroid 2, honestly. It's the only Metroid game where I've just had no desire to. Maybe with the exception, maybe that in NES Metroid as well. I haven't 100%ed that either. But every single other Metroid game I've 100%ed at least once in my time, and most of them I usually go for 100% every time that I go through. But Metroid 2, I have absolutely no desire to do that whenever I play through that game. And it's for pretty much all the reasons you listed out. Almost the vast majority of the expansion puzzles just involve you getting into spider ball mode, which as we talked about earlier, the spider ball sucks in this game. It's just not fun to use the spider ball in this game. And that's pretty much every puzzle. Go into spider ball, slowly crawl up the wall, bomb the walls, but make sure that the bomb isn't too close to you so that you don't fall off and have to start all over again.
Yeah.
Bomb it, make sure that you hit something, and then once something does open, slowly go into the hole, see if there's actually anything there. Or it could just be something to bait you to waste your time, because the game likes to troll you and do that as well, and it's just not fun. I think Super Metroid is like really where the series really finds its stride with fun item solving puzzles, especially with the speed booster, which is that's my favorite Metroid item, period, both 2D and 3D, but also not very relevant to this discussion.
Yeah, well, I mean, Super Metroid is where the series like just really leveled up. Like that might as well have been the first Metroid game in a lot of aspects because like that's where that's where we went from like 15 to 100 miles an
It
hour. So
it quite literally goes from 0 to 100 in Super Metroid.
yeah, so I mean, I wish that there was more, incentive or a more fun way. I guess I'm trying to think of a better way to say it, but like a more fun way to go and find some of these expansions. If you had a map, that would help. If you had a better use of the spider ball, that would help. If there were just more of them and like you kind of got into the groove and saying like, oh yeah, I'm so close, maybe I'll just finish off and whatever, that would help. But I feel like all of them kind of like fail each other here. So
And as we
not
talked,
really.
or sorry, go on.
Yeah. No, I was just it's not really much incentive.
And as we were talking about earlier in areas, after Area 2, because, all of the environments blend together, like traversing the environments isn't fun. Like, not only is getting the items not fun, but you don't even want to traverse. Getting to the puzzle that you don't want to solve is work. Just navigating
Yeah.
through the environment, so it just feels like a lose-lose, and it's just like, you know what, I just take me to the queen. I'll do it with 3 energy tanks. Why not? It can't.
Well, and the thing too is like just by the structure of Metroid 2 is like getting to those like couple areas is really tough. So like if you missed a missile upgrade in area 1 and you're in area 4, like you're gonna backtrack all the way back. You're gonna space jump with that finicky space jump and go back and get it. Like I don't think so. So we had fast travel, we had the pipe systems in the remakes, which I think alleviated a lot of that pressure. But yeah, I mean, if you miss something, it's like, do I really want to go all the way back and get it? So is what it is. But that's a couple ones right there. But I always like to save this category for last because I feel like there really isn't a Metroid game that doesn't offer a quality experience with music and sound design. So let's end on that, Doom. We got music and sound design. I'm gonna give this a 4. And I know that it's dated, and I know that these have been remixed into like better, more fleshed out themes in Samus Returns and AM2R. But man, like you listen to like you listen to the Surface of SR388 theme. That sounds awesome. You listen to the Golden Temple theme. That sounds awesome. I think that the Queen Metroid theme is like very creepy and very ominous. The fight with the Metroids, I think, is really good and sounds pretty intense for what it is. The sound effects in this game too, I absolutely love because they're like the classic Game Boy sound effects. Like even when you press pause, it's like that, like the outer space kind of sound or whatever. Like I think that sounds so good. I really dig the music in this game. I think that they did such a good job with all the tracks, and I think that it still holds up today. Chiptune is like still a big thing. So I think that you could listen to the soundtrack today in 2021 and appreciate it. And I really love the soundtrack and what they were able to accomplish like 30 years ago, which is crazy. So I'm going to give this a 4.
Well, you mentioned that pretty much all Metroid games have excellent music and sound design, and to that I say, don't forget, Andy, at some point you are going to have to do a ranking of Federation Force. But that aside,
I was thinking that as I said that. I was like, oh boy.
That aside, yeah, I absolutely love the music in this game. Obviously, for those who follow my work, you know that I've remastered the Metroid II soundtrack, the first ever surround sound remaster of this game. So check that out on my YouTube channel at Doomino Crossing if you want to check that out. And yeah, I absolutely love the music in this game. Surface of SR388 Main Tunnel, that is a top 10 all-time Metroid theme, and I will not be taking any dissent on that. Absolutely incredible. Ryoji Yoshitomi just absolutely hit it out of the park with this. I'm also going to give it a 4 as well. One of my favorite pieces of, because like there's so much to choose from, whether it's the actual like melodic pieces or whether it's the ambient pieces that enhance that environmental storytelling in the areas, like the area, like the area 1 theme, for example. It's just bleeps and bloops. It's not really something you're going to listen to on your own, but in the context of the game, like it adds so much to that unique atmosphere that the game provides. And Samus Returns even references some of those bleeps and bloops occasionally in some of the more melodic tracks, which I thought that was a really cool touch added by Daisuke Matsuoka. But going back to what I was saying, one of my favorite tracks has to be the title theme. Actually, listening to that title theme for the first time just blew me away, because it starts off with that kind of creepy. It kind of, a lot of the philosophy used in this game seems to be ripped right from Hirokazu Tanaka's original intentions on the first Metroid. Which, for those who don't know, Tanaka-san talked about this in interviews. When talking about the production of NES Metroid, but he wanted the soundtrack to feel like it was a living, breathing creature almost. That the diegetic atmosphere of the game would combine with the non-diegetic atmosphere of the music to make something that would almost bridge the gap between the two. And I feel like Yoshitomi-san took that with a step further with Metroid 2's soundtrack, and it especially shines for me in that title theme, because it starts with like these haunting, like it almost feels like the music is an actual Metroid, because you have these high pitched boo, and then you have like these gross, almost organic sound. Like it almost feels like a retro, kind of feels like what Yamamoto would later do with the Metroid Prime theme. Now that I'm like actually talking about this out loud and really connecting the dots. I wonder if he was influenced by the Metroid 2 title. But you have that, and then it develops into this absolutely beautiful melodic structure. It starts using more major chords, and then it hits with that climactic finale, the dun 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 dun, and it almost feels like this epic space event. That's the part that everyone
will recognize, yeah. And like, I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because I should have brought that up as well, because like when you fire up this game and you hear the title theme, the first like 20 seconds, it's just kind of like a series of slow beeps. So like you're probably inclined to just be like, all right, let's just get to the game. But like if you actually stop and like give it 30 seconds to get going, it's really, really awesome. And like it's been remade in AM2R and it sounds awesome there, but like man, it still just sounds so good, even using the chiptune processor. I don't even know if this is 8-bit or whatever, but it's really, really good.
Yeah, a lot of the music in this game, like, it still holds up for me today. And again, like, my attachment for this music has nothing to do with nostalgia. Like, I really got into this game, like, once I was in high school. Once I was already, like, well into the Metroid series. But, like, it's so good.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I agree. Go out of your way to listen to, I think especially, like, the Surface theme is really... I think that's, like, an iconic Metroid theme. I remember Dak saying that he didn't think that was an iconic theme, but I think that's like one of the better themes in Metroid, actually. Top 10 for me.
I remember responding.
Title theme is awesome.
I remember responding to that comment. So I believe I kind of agreed with both of you, because on one hand, like, I think it's iconic in the Metroid community. Like if you ask everyone in the Metroid community, like even if you haven't played Metroid 2, people know that Surface theme. But I feel like outside of the Metroid community, not many people would recognize it. And so I think that's where I feel like the enlightened centrist sitting somewhere in the middle of that. But yeah, like I said,
I think outside the Metroid community, I don't know that there's a lot of themes that people would recognize, except for whatever's in Smash.
Yeah, right.
Which is a crime that isn't in Smash, by the way.
Right. I was shocked, like, especially because like we got some Samus Returns tracks in Smash. I would have assumed at least that version of the Surface theme, which is also really good, by the way. But yeah, that original Surface theme, like, easily like a top 10 favorite of mine.
Yeah, the title theme is awesome. It's interesting to me because I tweeted out a couple days ago that like the Golden Temple theme from AM2R is like one of my favorite Metroid tracks. And it's interesting because if you listen to the temple theme in this game, you can hear it if you try. I don't know, like obviously they expanded on that so much and made it into a much better theme in AM2R, but like the skeleton of that theme is there, but it's interesting to see how like that musical evolution goes. And like I don't know anything about music, but I thought that it was like pretty cool to hear that and just see like, okay, this is where it came from and this is the original idea. So yeah, I thought that was pretty cool.
Well, a lot of the progression of the music in AM2R is actually heavily influenced by Metroid Prime. Gawasi's talked about this in a few of the interviews he did And I believe Torby, he was another person that worked on the soundtrack. He's the one that did Ancient Power specifically. He composed that theme, which is that's my favorite track from AM2R. But
which is another banger.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. AM2R, another game with just filled to the brim with incredible music. So yeah.
Yep, there we go. All right, well, we are at the end of our journey here, talking about Metroid 2: Return of Samus, released in November 1991. Absolutely unbelievable. This bad boy is almost 30 years old. It's going to be 30 in just a couple months, and we kind of dogged on it in a couple categories, and we beat it up here and there, but I think for the most part it still holds up pretty well. Is there a reason to go play it now that Samus Returns and AM2R exists? I don't know. Maybe.
For me personally, I have a lot of complex thoughts on it. For me personally, like as a fan, despite how much I ragged on this game, like I still really like it. I still think that again, there's so much uniqueness about Metroid 2 that even AM2R, which is my second favorite Metroid game of all time, even AM2R doesn't fully recapture that original atmosphere that Metroid 2 does. And while it has a lot of faults, I do appreciate those unique quirks as well as the stuff that it did introduce that would later become refined in later entries. And so I think it's a really important piece of Metroid history. That being said, for newcomers to the series, I would never in my right mind recommend playing this as your introduction to Metroid 2. I will always recommend either Samus Returns or AM2R to scratch that itch. And that if you like those games, I think revisiting this game is something you should do if you are into the remakes. It's definitely something I think that everyone should at least give a shot, at least check it out.
I think that's a good way to put it. Actually, I wouldn't recommend that somebody play this over either of those games, but I do think that it has its merits, and I do think that if you're a Metroid fan, you should play it. If you're listening to this and you've never played it and you've only played the remakes, it's like I said, it's like $5 to go hop on the Nintendo 3DS eShop and just download this, or maybe by God, even we'll have it on Nintendo Switch Online in September if the rumors prove to be true or not. But I think that it's a worthwhile experience, and I think that it's like, I don't know, it is an important part of Metroid history. With the baby Metroid, it's set up so much for what was to come, and it's been remade once by Nintendo, once by fans, so obviously there's some merit in this game. So yeah, I think that it still holds up fairly well. Obviously, it's not going to be outdoing either of the remakes, but if you're into exploring where the series has been and where it started, I think that you could really do worse than spending a couple hours playing Return of Samus. So, and it's much easier to play in 2021 than back then, because you do have maps online, you have walkthroughs and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that overall, while the score of this game in our final scores isn't going to be on the higher end of Metroid games, for contextually speaking, for 30 years ago, I think this is a much better game than Metroid for the NES.
Oh, absolutely. It's like NES Metroid is like the second. It's not at the bottom of my list. That's Federation Force, but like right before that is NES Metroid. Like I appreciate the heck out of NES Metroid, but like just it's so difficult to play today, even with maps and save states. Like it's such a slog to play through. Metroid 2, despite its problems, I still think is ultimately fun at the end, despite the issues I have with it, and it offers a unique, this unique atmosphere that no other Metroid game has really recaptured since then. And so I will always appreciate Metroid 2 for that. All in all, because we've now ranked Prime 2, Fusion, and this, I believe. Have we ranked anything else in the Omega Metroid podcast?
Not yet. And I think this is going to be sitting at the lowest.
Yeah, same for me. For sure. My order, I imagine your order is going to be Prime 2, Fusion, Metroid 2. For me, it's going to be Fusion, Prime 2, Metroid 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's and it would be, I would love if they remade Fusion so that we could get some of those quality of life changes, but I mean that's a show for another day. But yeah, this is going to be sitting at the bottom. I'm sure that when we rank Samus Returns and AM2R, both of those are going to be higher on my list, but I do think that it is worth going back and revisiting where this concept came from. and it's only going to cost you what, like 4 or 5 hours out of your life. So you could do worse.
Absolutely.
All right, well we are going to get out of here. We are going long, but I had a good time. Doom, thanks for coming on and talking some Metroid 2 with me, man.
Hey, no problem. You know, I always love a good excuse to talk about some Metroid, you know?
Well, you guys listening out there, make sure to check Doom out on Twitter at DoomIt'llCross, and you can check the show out as well while you're there at Omega Metroid Pod, and I am at Spiteri316. And of course, we are all over wherever you get your podcasts: Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, you name it, we're there. Go like and subscribe, recommend us to that Metroid fan in your life. Until next week, everybody, we will see you then. Take care.